Hello and welcome to the Love Jam now on Wednesday mornings for the West Coast of the US. And this topic is how to break free without breaking up. And it's especially for those of us who really value that evolutionary virtue of freedom. And sometimes I think we have to give up our freedoms in order to be in relationship, but that doesn't really work because freedom is such an important value to us. I mean, it's one of the values throughout history that people actually go to war and kill each other for it. So it's like so vital to humans to be free.
You might even think of this country kind of founded on this pursuit of opportunity and freedom as its very sort of zeitgeist, as the culture that this, at least the United States, is based on, and meant much of the Western world. Yeah.
Right. And freedom, it's not just freedom to do what you want to do, but I think freedom is that feeling where whoever I am, however I express myself, if I have an impulse that I feel is like really core to me and I go and express myself, freedom is when I feel like rewarded for that or praised for that or liked for that or loved for that. And it doesn't feel free if I feel like ridiculed or that being myself causes some kind of a problem or a conflict. So if you're just joining us, go ahead and in the chat, let us know where you're calling from, where you're, watching from. And throughout the entire Love Jam, as usual, we'd love to answer your questions. So if anything comes up for you, maybe freedom is really important to you and you've had some of the experiences we're talking about, or maybe your partner is talking about wanting to express more of their freedom and feeling caged and you want to know what to do. Whatever comes up for you, just go ahead and type in your question and we will respond real time. The rest of the Love Jam, we're going to tell a few stories. We're going to talk about some of the secrets that people who are able to have all the freedom they want and still stay totally committed in their relationships have figured out, that we've learned from over the years, and also some of our own discoveries that have made our relationship the way it is. Where I was just, right before we were getting started, I was just like sitting with the gratitude that I have for this incredible woman beside me. I didn't really know I could feel all the way free to be myself and be totally committed before this relationship. And I just feel so happy that I know that whatever is true for me, whatever is honestly an expression of me, I know Jennifer's going to be on board with it.
Absolutely.
Because she loves me. And if that's a part of me, I know she's going to love it. So even if sometimes I'm like afraid, like, oh no, this is a risk for me to be that way, or I'm not sure I can pull it off, or I'm not sure that's really who I am, I know that I have someone who can help me sort through that and really be a partner in that. Anyway, so thank you, my love. I'm so grateful.
And also we're going to take a typical toxic cycle that occurs when freedom is a value. There's a toxic cycle of anxious and avoidant that can take hold in your relationship, and we'll sort of role play. How do you, if you're in that cycle, and freedom is giving way to sort of an avoidance, like where you're wanting to move away and be that free spirit versus kind of leaning in, how do we actually unwind and rewrite that pattern and do something different? That doesn't mean that you have to, again, break up, but allows you to not compromise your freedom, but actually have each of you supporting that freedom while still remaining deeply committed. And so we're going to probably, towards the end, role play a little bit what that looks like, because we want to really help you unwind some of those toxic cycles. So that's some of what we're going to do today. And then anything else that you guys have to bring, we'll jam with you on it, as these are our love jams. So, as I think about the topic today, how to break free without breaking up, it reminds me of, a couple that we were coaching and knew several years ago, where this was really front and center in their relationship. And, see if you guys have a tendency on to really be flying this flag of freedom in your relationship, where your own personal sovereignty is really important to you in relationships, see if you relate to this story. So in this case, it happened to be a woman in the relationship that was having these feelings. And, she had been in the relationship, and also sometimes a common story. She was sort of feeling smaller in the relationship. She wasn't feeling as self-expressed as she wanted to feel. She wasn't feeling like her own desires and needs were being prioritized at the same level that maybe her partners were. And so many years of that had gone by. And after a while, there's a buildup that started to occur where she started to feel sort of angry or resentful, which is completely understandable, as she was feeling sort of like the relationship that she was in had boxed her into a small enough box that she no longer really felt like she fit inside it. There were parts of her that had been evolving and growing, and all of a sudden, those weren't being given airtime. Those weren't being related to and loved. In fact, they were seen as a threat to the relationship. As she was growing kind of outside the confines of the existing sort of context that they were in their relationship, it started to feel really crowded and caged for her. And so what happened is there was an escalation of her anger and upset. And underneath that was a deep desire for her to really individuate, instead of being just known as the couple where she was sort of the wife of someone and even a secondary figure. She was becoming an incredibly sovereign and more empowered woman in her own right. And that journey, because it was such a different way for them to relate, because they were both sort of complicit in this story of her being the wife and being sort of a little bit less expressed, and having his needs be a little bit more front and center for both of them.
Well, and in this case, the whole role of mother was a big part of it too.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. She had several kids.
They had a couple kids,
yes.
And then she really, when the kids are young, they tend to take up a lot of your attention.
Yes.
And then as the kids started to get a little bit older and started to explore their own autonomy, now she's like, wait a minute, who am I other than just a mother? And she's wanting to kind of reinvent that part, that part of herself as a woman that isn't the mother. And that was part of that.
Absolutely.
Space.
And that reinvention, something we're going to actually talk about even more. If that reinvention isn't given space within the relationship, then the relationship is going to feel more like a cage than a palace, right? Than a temple. And so that was sort of some of her experience. And as she started to value her sovereignty, as she started to value her autonomy and her agency in the relationship, her partner got more and more threatened by that. Because all of a sudden, he was having to contend with a brand new being with new desires that might have, in his mind, been contrary to the desires that he had for them. So this created a cycle that is often found in relationships where one partner is wanting to be more free-spirited, more sovereign, more empowered, wanting to follow their desires, what they want, and wanting their partner to be on board with that, while the other gets a little anxious and wants them to stay the same and want, like, hey, stay more connected, and can't we keep things as they were? And in the threat of that, can feel the anxiety of their partner pulling away and being less and less committed to them and to the relationship. And so it really can rock the boat. And so for those of you in this story, maybe you can relate to either side of this, either the side of your partner really wanting their freedom and their sovereignty, and and maybe you're on that track where you see how valuable it is to really express that freedom and express that sovereignty. Or maybe you were on the side of feeling like, in the way that your partner was expressing that, you were feeling like what you really wanted was the devotion and commitment, such that, yes, we can express our desires, but do we have to do it in a way that has us disconnect and get farther apart from each other. So I just want to point out the sort of polarities that are happening under the hood here of this, which is a lot of what Bryan and I notice when we're with couples is we can feel the sort of energetic dance that's happening. And there's a shadow and light to this dance. And on the toxic cycle side, the shadow side, I've sort of been hinting at it. What is often happening is an anxious avoidant cycle. Right. And this has become more and more popular these days. If any of you have heard of attachment theory, right? And so we often form an insecure attachment when we're young. And this really starts to form even when you're 1, 2, 3 years old, really young, and you have your attachment figure, which could be your mother or your dad or any caretaker in your life that's really significant. And if you have a very secure attachments, in this case, we mean this in a positive sense, like not like you're attached and codependent, but literally that your feeling of connection to those caregivers feels really secure. You're not questioning it.
It's not threatened.
It's not threatened. And as a child, you either feel loved or lovable, or you don't, and you question that. And when that's really solid, you're like, as a child, you might not say these words, but there's this feeling of, oh, I'm loved. I feel there's safety and love and belonging here. Right. And when you have all that love, safety, and belonging, there's a security in you as a child that forms really young, that allows you to transcend a lot of the anxious and avoidant, insecure attachment that can occur. But for many of us, we do question, are we loved? Are we lovable? Right? Is this environment I'm in with these caregivers, is there love, safety, and belonging? Do I belong to this family, or am I pushed out? Is it safe, like both in a literal physical sense and even in an emotional sense? Am I safe to be myself, to be me? And is there love? So these questions get answered when we're young. And if we question it, either mildly or extremely, we can form what they call an insecure attachment. And there's usually two primary reactions to that insecurity. If we're like, well, maybe I'm not lovable, maybe it isn't safe, maybe I don't belong. If we start having those questions in our mind at a young age with our caregivers, then we can do one of two things. And those two things are, we either get anxious, and which means that we want to cling to that and say, well, love me, come get closer, right? We'll cling on in our anxiety as our reaction to that insecurity to try to hold on to any love and safety that we can find there by almost merging into the people around us. And we merge, sending all of our energy into them so that we don't even have our own sovereign nervous system anymore. We're sort of keying off of our partners. And because our partners or our caregivers are changing all the time, we're sort of at the mercy of whether they're showing us love or not. We don't have our own sovereign sense of, oh, I'm safe, I'm secure. If you're in the anxious pattern, if they're looking at you and paying attention to you, giving you love, then you can feel it. But the moment they turn away, maybe the phone rings and they pick up something else, or maybe they go make dinner, or it could be even a subtle motion that they make where in a moment you were reaching, and then in that moment, their husband or wife called them and they turned around and boom, you were rejected and left and abandoned in that moment. And if you are insecure, you make up the story that you are unsafe. And that's the anxious pattern, where you want to cling on and connect and merge with those around you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only one response to that insecure attachment. The other response is, it's actually the same fundamental question. Am I loved? Am I lovable? Is there love, safety, and belonging around me? You question that. And instead of clinging, you avoid. You're like, well, wow, this love thing, this love game, this connecting to other people is completely unsafe. I'm going to avoid it altogether because it's too painful. because I want to avoid feeling rejected. I want to avoid feeling like I'm not okay as I am. I want to avoid feeling like I can't express myself. I want to avoid being so vulnerable that I would open myself up to be heard. And so that's in the moment in a young child where they, they close off and they shut down, and then they don't even reach anymore, and they distance themselves. They stop being affectionate. They stop being loving with their parents, and they start believing that they can't get that from anyone. But it's from fundamentally the same place. So that toxic cycle of anxious and avoidant is two responses to that questioning of whether we're loved and lovable. And so it shows up in our adult relationships. Go ahead. And then I'm going to relate it back to the story.
I was just going to back to the story. I was going to talk about, so there she was, right? And she's having this experience, and she's feeling these new urges, this new part of herself emerge, but she's also feeling that that's not safe in the relationship. And one of the things that she did, which I think is pretty common, is she goes to her friends and she kind of asks for advice, like, "Oh my God, I'm having this experience. What do I do?" And I don't know if she did that on purpose or just didn't notice, but a lot of those friends were single. So this is my public service announcement. I love your single friends. I think your single friends are great, and I think they're very wise on many, many topics. However, if you really take a lot of advice from them about your relationship, you're likely to end up single, just like them, right? So they're the kind of single person's mindset around this problem is you just need to exert your freedom. You just need to be yourself. And if your partner doesn't love who that is, then that's their problem. And, then they don't really love you, and they probably don't deserve you. I kind of understand how you could see it that way.
Yes.
Because if you're in a world where you either accept me or you don't accept me, then of course accept me that means you love me.
Yeah, they're coming from a good place, but I often, we often end up coaching the couples that have reached out to their friends and gotten this advice, and then they come to us. Well, all my friends are telling me that I should break up with my husband, wife, sister, whoever it is that they're in a partnership with. They say that I shouldn't put up with that, not for a minute, and you hear the moment there's challenge in a relationship, often, not always. So if you happen to be single and you aren't the one that gives this advice, this doesn't apply to you. But for those of you that do, when you ask a single person, they almost always will fight for one pole, one of the polarities, which is your freedom, your liberation, and we'll see any partner that isn't on board with that as an obstacle to that, and therefore a reason to exit the relationship. So this vice is common. I
was just going to add the other. So the other side of that is to get advice from people who are miserable in their relationships because they've given up on who they are for some idea of togetherness. Like my grandmother, my dear grandmother, her relationship advice was that you should make a list of the top 10 things that you really must have in your relationship. And then if you ever get a relationship that has one of the things on the list, marry that person and just be happy and give up on the rest. Give up on the other 9. and she was,
it's not exactly the best advice either, right?
The word battle axe, I think, was coined for this woman. She was just all her juiciness and like femininity and stuff had been forgotten, years and years and years ago. And that's not the best advice either. Just, forget these important parts of who you are.
Yeah. So if that's not the right advice, if the right advice isn't necessarily, if you run up against, just like this story that we're telling you, run up against wanting to feel free, wanting to be individuated and sovereign, and feeling like you're not being supported in that, like the relationship is caging you in. If the answer isn't, well, throw away that man, throw away that woman, that relationship, whatever you're in, isn't the right advice. And give up on those freedoms and let go of all of the rest of the things you want in order to just keep the relationship is not the right advice. So what is the right advice? Like what do we do in that instance? And what we want to show you right now is that the way out of that anxious and avoidant cycle is to do something sort of counterintuitive. And when there's fear in the system around your lovability, it becomes anxious and avoidance. And as you start to resolve that fear, what happens is the remedy, if you're on the freedom side, wanting more freedom, and you're avoidant, which happens to be when you're usually on the freedom side, you happen to move away and be a little bit more avoidant, a little less committal, so that you can be free-spirited. The remedy for that is to give your partner more devotion, right? And if you're on the anxious side and you're being really clingy, the remedy for the anxious cycle, to unwind that, is to give your partner in that moment more freedom and to really champion their freedom. So anxious and avoidant becomes freedom and devotion. And so this allows you to have both your sovereignty and connect to your unity. And when you have this cycle and realize these remedies, then you don't have to sacrifice one for the other, that you create a relationship that isn't either free or devoted, but it has freedom and devotion. And this was really the opening of our relationship when we even began, because we noticed that most of us, even if this isn't explicitly stated, most of us, when we enter into a relationship, and this felt like common culture, like this is like the common advice given that we were sort of swimming in when we met. We were like, okay, so we can either give up a little bit of our freedom in order to be in this relationship with one another, and then feel like, of course, that's worth it, right? Because I'm getting this incredible man in my life, and I'll devote myself to him and give up a little bit on me feeling all the way free, because what I'm getting in return is so much grander. And so we make that deal. We say, okay, I'm willing to give up some of my freedom for devotion. Or we're in the single category at the moment, and we're like, okay, so I'm willing to give up having a committed and a devoted partner so that I can have my freedom. And for me,
myself, yeah.
I can be myself. I can do what I want when I want, and it's okay, because all of that freedom is so worth it, giving up on that devotion. And Bryan sort of hinted at this, and I just want to underline it, which is, we really can't, if we enter into that bargain, which many of us do, we like explicitly or implicitly give up on one of these two values, then what we're breeding is a relationship that will eventually fall apart in the resentment, because we have to feel free. Like, this is a core value. When we feel caged in our relationships, when we don't feel free, we start to wither and die a little bit inside, right? And that even though in the beginning it feels like the amount you're giving up is small and the amount you're getting is big, that little bit that you're giving up, as you pile on the years, starts to get loud enough that resentment kills the relationship. Similarly, devotion, we need to feel loved and connected in relationship. They've done even animal studies that will show that a rat will choose like feeling loved and connected over even food and feeding themselves, if given the choice, if they have to choose between the two. It's that core to who we are. And we will literally wither and die without that feeling of devotion and love and connection in our lives. So if that's the case, if we fundamentally need to feel all the way free and all the way devoted and connected to one another, how do we resolve this paradox, this seeming paradox where we feel like we need to give up on one or the other?
A minute ago, you were saying that, if you're feeling anxious, in other words, if I want to be free, and I also have some fear about that freedom, and so I feel anxious, I feel avoidant. I want to bolt. I want to get out of here because I need to be myself. That the key to unlock that would be devotion. But doesn't that sound like kind of giving up on freedom? Like the key to freedom is giving up on freedom. So help me understand, like, how do I invest in devotion, but without giving up on my freedom?
Yeah. That's a great question. So how do you invest in devotion? If this talk is about the people that are wanting to break free, that are on the more freedom side of the equation, that they want what they want to do what they want to individuate. How is investing in devotion not like a giving up on the freedom? Well, we want to deconflate those. What I find, and I think what we both find, is that the more you're willing to have your partner feel utterly devoted, like they have your partner feel your like commitment to the relationship, that feeling of stability and commitment, that unassailable, I'm not going anywhere, I've got you, I'm here, right? That solidity is what allows them to relax the fear that has them gripping. And then the only response in that moment, when your partner gives you such utter devotion, is now that the fear is lessened. Like every time he exercises freedom, I'm worried he's going to leave me. He's going to go somewhere. He's going to be with other people. He's not going to like me anymore. All those fears that come up, suddenly you're like, oh, he's not going anywhere. Oh, he does love me. Oh, him exercising his freedom doesn't mean he loves me less. Oh, and that's a huge insight. Him or her, your partner exercising their freedom doesn't have to mean that they love you any less. And the more that you invest in your partner knowing that your freedom has nothing to do with you feeling less committed, less devoted, less connected to them, it has everything to do with your own feeling of liberation and freedom, and that those don't have to somehow be an either or game. Either you're giving me devotion or you're being free. When you unhook from this either or game, that it's one or the other, and realize that, and you help your partner, if you're on the freedom side and you give them the feeling of like, I'm here, right? I am committed, right? Nothing will come between us but us. There's not some other activity I'm going to do, some other person, some other pursuit, some other hobby that's going to come between us. It's I'm here and I am committed. That when you're on the other side of that, if you're the anxious and you feel that level of secure attachment, the only response is like, oh, how else do I want to love this man than to support his freedom and support his expression? And like, then it becomes so easy in that moment. So if you're willing to do the counterintuitive thing, if you're on the freedom side, even though you're wanting to go farther away from your partner, you're wanting to really assert it. And in this story we told you, which is commonly the case, this particular person went all the way into individuation. And as her partner was feeling more and more threatened, she got kind of more and more angry and just said, well, that's your problem. And then invested in less and then all of a sudden his story that she was less devoted started to become true.
Right. Self-fulfilling prophecy.
And he was kind of right. He started to become right about that. And so this toxic cycle that ends so many relationships that which we always wish we could reach out in those moments. And we were friends with them at the time. So we watched this story play out. And so his fears started to becoming the truth. She started to become less committed, and it eventually undermined the relationship, and the relationship fell apart. But if in that moment, as the one that wanted to be free, not giving up her freedom, but saying, look, I want to engage in the activities that support my freedom, but that don't erode our devotion, and vice versa. And that's something that Bryan and I committed to, that I was going to say earlier, which is when we came together, we sort of saw that dynamic, saw the anxious avoidance cycle, the freedom and devotion kind of fighting each other, and saw the folly of giving up on two things that were vitally important. And we said to one another, Well, we're not going to engage in any activity that supports our freedom, but erodes our devotion. And we're also not going to engage in any activity or thing that supports our devotion, but erodes our freedom. And so within that was an overlap. What are all the things that support our freedom and our devotion? And that's our playground. And we went a step further in our relationship, which we recommend any evolving lover do, which is, can we make that territory where freedom and devotion overlap wider and wider and wider, so that really there is nothing that I can do that supports my freedom that I think or he thinks erodes our devotion. Like, me being free doesn't erode the devotion. So there is no territory that doesn't overlap, and vice versa, that there is nothing that I can do that supports my devotion but erodes my freedom. And both sides are now, for us, the territory is co-located. Like, we don't have any territory anymore that feels like it erodes one or the other. And that commitment to really explore what resolves both freedom and devotion, not freedom or devotion, allowed us to build for us a relationship that had incredibly secure attachment, where I mean, I could cry with how free I feel in this relationship, how much more expansive I am, the kind of woman that I've become in this love story is capable of way more than I was when we began. And how else would I love a man than to want to set him free and to have him be liberated in any way and shape and form that has him feel in any way caged? Like, I want him to be the most expressed version of him. Like, that is the mantle of love that I hold, and how I want to love him, or really anyone in my life.
So I want to talk about a little bit about the either or dynamic, because this happens a bunch in relationships where you start to feel trapped between two options you don't like. And in this, the example of freedom, often it's like, I feel like there's something I want to do or be or say or invest in, or time I want to spend, or person I want to see, but you're not going to like it. And so then I have to choose between you being really unhappy and upset, or me getting what I want. And I have this either or. And if you're experiencing an either or where both sides feel bad, I promise that there's something hidden in your blind spot that's making the one or both of those choices feel bad that you might not be aware of. And so, for example, if I want to go spend a night with the boys and, have my boys' night out, and Jennifer's, like sad and lonely and doesn't want me to go out. And I think, well, geez, I can either have my guy friends or I can have this relationship, and that's my either or. Probably there's something else going on. Like, for example, the way I might be talking about this boys' night out might be really hurtful to Jennifer. Or like I might, instead of saying, hey, I'd like to go to this boys' night out, I might say, you never let me do what I want. And for example, you would hate it if I spend time with these other guys, or maybe one of the guys that I want to spend time with is kind of a jerk and has said really mean things to Jennifer that I've never actually addressed.
Or even underneath the, hey, I want to have a guy's night out, is, I'm so sick and tired of hanging out with you. I don't really want to be around you. I want to go somewhere else. Right. And if that's underneath the desire for the guy's night out, then even if you don't say it, like, look, I really need a guy's night out. Like, can you feel like, look, I just really need it. What if you feel what's underneath even the request? It's like, ugh, I'm sick of you. I don't want to be around you. And so that undercurrent can really unearth a feeling of insecurity around the level of like love and safety and devotion here. It's like, oh, spending time with your friends is is your subtle way of telling me you don't like me and you don't like being with me and you don't want to be connected to me. So instead of, hey, I just am really excited, I want to be with my guys tonight, I haven't seen them in a while, we have so much fun together, I'm looking forward to this, right? And as I say it this way, you can feel like it's like a positive desire towards something that feels fun and good, has nothing to do with wanting to be away from my partner, but has everything to do with wanting to move towards something that would be great. And so it's so much easier if you're in the anxious position to be in support of that freedom than to try to want to thwart it and say, ouch, it hurts me every time you go out.
Yeah. So if you're experiencing that either or, there's probably something making it feel bad, which isn't the thing you want. Like, I don't want to have my friends say hurtful things to Jennifer. I don't want to give her the message that I don't want to be around you. Those are not things that are associated with my freedom. Those are things that are associated with unresolved crap that I just haven't dealt with. And so it's the unresolved crap you haven't dealt with that's making it feel bad, not the expression of who you are. And when you can start to parse that out, and as Jennifer was saying, if I double down on devotion, we'll be able to tell those two things apart. And instead of just the reaction, maybe Jennifer could say, well, I love the idea of you going out, but I feel good about the way this person spoke to me. So I'd like you to resolve that. Or I love the idea of you going out, but I feel like there's another message in there, about you not wanting to be with me. And I was like, no, babe, I do want to be with you. And in fact, let's plan a date, and it's 2 weeks from now, and we're going to do this.
So now he's providing the remedy notice of having me feel devotion. And now I'm like, oh, that sounds great. Have fun with your friends. Like, then it's so easy. The tension of you don't love me, you don't want to be with me relaxes. And then my natural response is like, oh, well, great. Well, go have fun with your friends and let's do that date. Let's have that date on another night.
So I promise, it's never freedom. It's never your freedom that's threatening to your partner.
Yeah.
And it's never their devotion, which feels like it's caging you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never your devotion to them that's going to limit your freedom. Freedom and devotion get to live together. And that's what we've experienced, is the more we have faith in that, the more it reveals itself to be true.
Yeah. And in other words, the more devotion in the system is not the less freedom you have, the more you have, because then both sides, not just one, both sides are solid and secure. And in that moment of stability are able to go farther and feel more free, because that freedom is now supported by a solid base of devotion. And then the more that devotion's there, the easier it is to be free. And then the more freedom there is, then once your partner is so championing your liberation and freedom, like all you want to do is literally drop to your knees in devotion and in gratitude and saying, thank you. I am exactly the human I wanted to be. I am more self-expressed and more deliberated in our love than I could ever have imagined. And the only response to being that freed and liberated by your partner is to want to love them more for that incredible gift. So these actually work to unwind the toxic cycle of that anxious and avoidant polarity that dances its dance in so many relationships. So let's talk about sort of a couple of our secrets, kind of unlock some of the secrets. So how do we do this, right? So we've given you sort of what there is to do, right? And, if you're in the freedom position, what there is to do is bring more devotion. And if you happen to be on the other side, more anxious, you are there to give more freedom. But how do we do that? So what's our secret? Well,
the first from the position of someone who wants more freedom, who wants to break free, but without breaking up, then the first thing that you can do is something we call devotional mapping. It's literally making a map. You can make like a mind map on a piece of paper, or you could just do it in your head. But make a map of what are the things that make your partner experience the most devotion from you. What is it that makes them feel your devotion to them? often, even in our moments of wanting the most freedom, we'll still feel a sense of devotion to our partner, and they might not be feeling that. So what is the thing that we could do that would have them feel the way we feel about our devotion to them? And the more specific, the better, because oftentimes, if we're afraid of expressing devotion because it's going to cage our freedom or reduce our freedom, or that, we'll be in some kind of prison, usually it's because we have a much broader view of what our partners might need from us. Like I've heard people that we've been working with say things like, "Oh, my partner needs me to text her 3 times a day in order for me to feel, in order for her to feel my devotion, I have to text her 3 times a day on my business trip or whatever." And that turns out not to be true. That turns out to be more like, again, there was this thing in the shadow that this person didn't realize, it happened to be a man in this case, who happened to be with a woman, and he would be going away, and he was constantly breaking promises to her about when they'd be in contact. And then so she was responding to having broken promises by saying, "Well, why aren't you contacting me? Why aren't you contacting me?" And he interpreted that as that she needed him to text her 3 times a day.
Well, or gosh, she needs me to constantly be in communication with her. I feel so caged by how often I'm having to do that.
I can't even go to dinner.
Deleting the broken agreements and that might had those been in place had she felt to his devotion, like that he remained connected to her even when he was out of town. She probably wouldn't have needed any of that.
So doing a devotional map would have been him realizing that making and keeping agreements about being in contact is really important to her feeling his devotion, much more important than he imagined it would be, and much more important than the frequency, than the number of times that the contact happened. So this is the kind of specificity I'm talking about. It's not just, Jennifer feels my devotion when I'm in contact with her. Well, of course she does. But what is it? Is it like a specific agreement on an agreed upon time? That actually probably wouldn't be Jennifer's, by the way, her map. There are other things that really work for her.
Yeah, and well, the point is everyone is way more unique about this than you imagine. And when we say our first secret is to do a devotional map, we really mean down to the very specificity of like, what's the tone of voice and what are you saying and what are the words, the specific words. Bryan said to me one day, just on the specificity of the words, I tell him I love him all the time. And, I love you so much. Right. And he said to me one day, "You know what really lands it for me? It's like, yes, I love that you say I love you and that you love me and all of these beautiful things you say. But the thing that really lands straight into my heart is for you to say that you have feelings for me." And so I will look at him sometimes and go, "Bryan, I have feelings for you."
It's so great.
I have so many feelings for you. And for whatever reason that is so special for him, when I say that I have feelings for him, that particular phrase, and even with a little bit of playfulness that I say it, is exactly what unlocks his feeling of like, oh, this woman is devoted to me. So we all have these unique ones.
For me, I think it came from like watching a movie, and I saw, there was one character said that they had feelings about another character, and I just was so jealous. I wanted to be that character as a kid or something. And for whatever reason, that like clicked for me as devotion. And a big part of Jennifer's devotional map is actually that it's something that isn't even, I don't even do it physically with her. It's if I'm speaking to another person or if I'm physically not in her presence, and I imagine that she's present, so that whatever I say, I would say the exact same thing if she was sitting there, standing there, or not. That non-verbally, like energetically communicates devotion to Jennifer. Yes. She can really feel the difference. Yes. And it's powerful. And when I'm doing that, she feels devotion at 11. And then I don't have to worry about what I'm saying or doing or being. I just be myself, and I feel totally free, and she feels my devotion fully. But I didn't have that habit when we met. When we met, it was more like I just would put my attention on whatever was in front of my face and forget about everything else. Sort of a perceiver view of the world, if you follow any of the Myers-Briggs programs. But
yeah, if I felt like he had to disconnect from me in order to connect with someone else, I felt that break in connection. And so what I wanted was, so for him to remain connected to me, even as he's connecting, not that he has to do anything different or say anything different, just that his connection with me is the piece that's like the stable piece. Like he always has this feeling of, and the moment he did that, I never doubt that this man loves me and is devoted to me. I feel like I have won the lottery of having the most devoted man on the planet. And therefore I'm excited every time he goes off and he can do anything he wants, like I'm happy for that. And I'm in support of that. But part of the difficulty in our relationship was running through the moments where that didn't feel true. And so on my map, it's like, stay connected to me, even when we're, separated and across different space and different time.
Which I just didn't know. I just didn't know that was a thing. I had never thought about it. And it's super easy to do because I do think about Jennifer all the time anyway. So having her in my mind while I'm having a really fun experience is actually joyful. It's like, it's almost like if I'm off water skiing or something, I get to have Jennifer with me while I'm water skiing, which is fun for me. And then she feels devotion. So everybody's devotional map is very, very unique to them. And the more you learn about it, the more you learn that some of the things that you're afraid might impede your freedom actually even aren't on their maps. And if you feel like it is either or a tug of war, you probably haven't looked closely enough to divide it up into small enough pieces to find exactly the thing, because it's probably a neighbor to the thing that is making you feel like you aren't able to express as much of your freedom, but it probably isn't the thing, because at their core, devotion and freedom go together. Especially, I just want to say one more thing about that. I think the sort of single life freedom is mostly a myth, because the people who I know who have been single for a very long time, they don't feel as free to be themselves because there's so much of themselves that can't be expressed except for in a partnership. And, they might feel lonely, or they might feel like they're missing out on a part of life, or they might feel like they don't have someone to share their experience with or something. And they end up actually being sort of more controlled by their singleness than I feel by my coupleness. And so the freedom that is actually not even freedom at the end of the day, that you get, that if you just say, I'm going to just be me and screw everybody else and whatever they feel like and they want, you end up caged by your own idea of yourself, your own concept of yourself, instead of actually being free to discover who you really are. Any more secrets?
Yeah. Well, there's another one that we want to introduce here. So, secret number 2, I would say, is really like flipping on its head what I see in most ordinary relationships. And I look at it like this. In an ordinary relationship, we tend to have a fixed identity for the most part. Like, this is who I am. And even those on the freedom side, well, often this is like how it's even talked about. Like, here's who I am. Here's what I value. Here's what I'm about. Here's what I want. And that's somewhat fixed. And our commitment is flexible, right? So we have a fixed identity and a flexible commitment. And here's what I mean by flexible commitment, meaning I'm going to be in this relationship until, and then unless, it goes bad and I don't like it and it's challenging and it doesn't work for me anymore. And when it doesn't work for me anymore, I exit. And if any of you have done serial relationships one after another, you're doing this. You're sort of saying, I need it this particular way. You're not doing it right for me, or this just isn't good for either of us, and I'm going to leave. So my commitment is fundamentally flexible and contingent on, or conditional on, how we think it's going. And my identity is somewhat on the more fixed side. And so I'm not willing to drop and be a different person in order to make it work, right? Because if I did, maybe it would work and maybe I would stay. So that fixed commitment and flexible identity fixed commitment, flexible identity is what I see as the ordinary way we relate. So what I want us to do in an evolutionary and relationship, when you really want an extraordinary one, we do this 180. So instead of having a fixed commitment, a fixed identity, we have a flexible identity. And instead of having a flexible commitment, we have a fixed commitment. So you see, instead of a fixed identity and a flexible commitment, we have a flexible identity and a fixed commitment, right? So we both need, all beings, for evolution to occur. We need one point of stability, one stable point, and we need one point of flexibility, right? Such that we can move. And like locomotion, like literally walking, or any motion, forward motion of any kind, requires 1 point stable, 1 point in motion, 1 point stable, 1 point in motion. So we actually do need a point of stability. But what we're recommending, our secret to breaking free without breaking up, is to put the point of stability in the commitment, right? And put the point of flexibility in your identity. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because we haven't talked about that yet. We did talk about devotion being stable, right? And when that's your point of stability, and you're willing to have a relationship to your identity that is a lot more fluid, flexible, adaptable, then what unlocks in the relationship is freedom itself. Because often our fixedness around our identity is the thing that's caging us. It's not our partner's request for devotion. The devotion is literally the point of stability both parties need in order to actually explore their freedom enough to shift their identity to be adaptable. And when I share this, I invariably, somebody pipes in and says, well, wait a minute. Are you saying that I basically have to change myself to please my partner, and stay committed, even if it's bad? And so
Sounds like being a doormat.
It sounds like being like a codependent doormat. And my response to that is that if you're in the shadows, you could express it that way. And indeed, that can and does happen. But what we're talking about in a more extraordinary relationship, since the commitment is so solid and you feel so much love, safety, and belonging, that the idea that you would be flexible in your identity is that if you're in a good relationship, then you're sort of letting go, not of anything good that you want, but letting go of any limitations that are caging you or holding you back. And what you're allowing to be flexible is those limitations dropping away so that you can expand to fill a larger and larger and larger container. So you're not giving up on anything, you're expanding to become more of everything. So instead of it feeling like you're being less, you're actually being asked, no, I actually want you to be more in all directions of all the things. We're not trying to cage you in any particular way. We're saying, here's the stable commitment. Now let's get more free. Oh, here's a place that's got arrested attention. Let's liberate that attention. Let's liberate the places that are stuck. And so in doing that, you actually become a new person. And that, from the beginning story, that woman that was feeling caged in her relationship, if she had invested in devotion as a core, and her partner had invested in setting her free as the primary job that he had in being in the way that he loved her, then he would have felt safe to do so. And she would have been supported in becoming more of who she was, and probably felt even more deeply in love in the process. So again, we want you to have a fixed commitment and a flexible identity instead of a flexible commitment and a fixed identity. So we want you to turn those on their head. That's our next secret. And so in my relationship with Bryan, my experience was, I had the more limited version of myself. I was the most judgmental. I had the smallest view of who I could be. And he really had an extraordinary view of who I could be. So in loving him, I got to die into becoming the woman I dreamed of being. I got to let go of the limited version of me and then feel safe enough to become a larger and more beautiful, more expressed, more empowered version of myself in this love story. So that's a kind of secret number 2.
If I'm more, what sometimes we say on the freedom side, right? If I'm more naturally pulling the relationship towards freedom, wanting more freedom, feeling anxious or avoidant about the lack of it, or feeling caged in these things. Another aspect of the devotion you could invest in, I think it's good to be compassionate for how scary that can be to your partner. If I want to go experiment and be a totally different person, or go, on a 3-month tour, of Europe, and I'm gonna have no cell phone and completely out of contact. I think it's okay to be afraid about that if you're the partner. I think it's really great to be compassionate about, just the fear, and rather than treating the fact that might frighten your partner as some kind of lack of love for you, you could investigate, like, well, what is it that's most scary about that? What are you afraid of, and what bad thing can happen, and what are the kinds of things that might make you feel safe and secure? Is there any condition where you would feel so safe and so secure that wouldn't be scary? And you start to ask those kinds of questions. And not only will that strengthen the relationship and be more of an investment in the devotion, but you might learn that there's aspects of your plan or your idea of yourself that are based in your own shadow. And they actually have some wisdom for you. It's not just caging you because they want you to be less free, but they're maybe seeing something you're not seeing that could be not healthy for you or for the relationship. And if you really investigate it, you could discover that. And when you incorporate that, it's like, oh, well, now that I've learned that piece, maybe I want to do it this other way instead. And then your partner relaxed. And now you've discovered not an idea of who you thought you were, but who you really want to emerge as. I feel more free today than I really ever have. Not because I'm more like the concept that I used to have of what freedom looked like for me, but because I've discovered more and more of the things I thought that I needed in order to feel happy aren't really true. And that who I really am is, it's just different than I thought. It's a lot less edgy and extreme and it's a lot more like happy and loving and relaxed, like it's just with a complete faith in the future. And that's what I've gotten out of freedom is just, I think we talked about one possible definition of freedom is that you're totally right with who you are and what your desires are. That you have no parts of you judge yourself for who you are or what your desires might be. And I think that's like a true freedom. That devotion is so supportive of that, because when you're devoted to a partner and you love them no matter what, and they love you no matter what, it's so supportive of you getting right with who you are and relaxing your own judgments, which might be the real reason you don't feel free. It might be your own judgments that you're projecting on your partner and pretending they're theirs, but that's the advancement.
Well, I love what you're saying, because what I'm hearing in it is, freedom is not just doing what you want. It's being right with what you want. Fully right with it. So when we're in some of the shadow of this pattern, when we're in some of the avoidance, which can also sometimes look like self-absorption or selfishness or entitlement, like I should get what I want and that's what matters. And, you're fighting for the I in the relationship while the devotional partner is fighting for the we. But what I'm hearing and what you're saying that I like is that you get right with your desires, and therefore, whether your partner is responding in a positive way or a negative way to your desires is sort of a mirror for you around how kind of healthy those desires are to begin with. Because sometimes what we want is coming from a place where we're not actually aligned, right? We're coming from a place that's not actually, is coming from the fear, like where it's a compensation for something, or we're afraid of a lack of something that's not true, or an imaginary fear and so our desires are sort of funded by something that's actually fundamentally not all the way real and not all the way true. And often our partners will respond as we outsource to them our lack of congruence around our desire. And we'll see in our partner that lack of congruence because they're feeling that lack of congruence and then responding to it in real time. Like, hey, you want to do what? Like, that doesn't feel good. And so often, I think as a barometer for how pure your desires are, if you're on the freedom side, is even watching whether your partner is like, hell yeah, all the way on board or not. And that if they aren't, sometimes it might be because they're in their anxious pattern. And it has nothing to do with you. But it's good to double check if you're on the freedom side. Oh, am I outsourcing my lack of alignment around what I say I want? Is it coming from the purest place in me? Is my partner just mirroring to me what I'm not seeing in myself with my own lack of congruence? So this is like another little hack to me in relationships.
And it's at the hour.
Oh shoot. Okay.
So,
we had more.
we'll do more next time.
Do I have like 2 minutes to make a final secret? Secret number 3, which I feel like is a profound one if you let it in, and a relationship saver for us, which is that there are many relationships that can occur within one relationship. Here's what I mean by that, is that what happens is we often will grow, and the container that held us in our relationship, the context for how we're relating, will start to feel too small. And so we'll start to want to push the container out and not feel comfortable in it. It's like an incubator box, and we're like growing bigger than what can fit in that box. And in that moment, often our go-to is, well, this relationship, because you think of it as the container that's holding you, that is fixed, doesn't feel good. I need to leave, or else I can't fit here anymore. I can't be me here anymore.
And container can mean like the way we're interacting, the kind of roles we have around the house,
our roles are big ones.
The the kind of way we handle conflict, or the way that I think of you and you think of me. Like maybe I'm the student and you're the teacher, or these kinds of
narratives, the automatic narratives you're running about who you are,
why you're together, and what you're getting out of the relationship, or all of those. That's the container that Jennifer's talking about.
And we mistake that for being the relationship, because it really does feel like that context is the relationship. So if you realize, secret number 3 is, if you realize that you can actually break free without breaking up in that moment, instead of going, wow, well, this relationship's clearly not good for me. You're right about that. This context and container isn't good for either of you. You're right about that. What you might be wrong about is that the whole relationship needs to go. You can sort of go into what we call like a death process, where that version, that container is put away. That container is no longer serving you. You get rid of the container, you dismantle the container completely, and you create a new one. So Bryan and I have had at least like 2.5 relationships, maybe. Right. So where we got to a point where that particular way we were relating needed to be dismantled, and we needed to build a much grander, larger container to hold us without breaking up, but actually creating something that created a feeling of way more expansion and freedom. And so realizing that your relationship you can have it die, you can have the container dismantled while holding the commitment fixed and creating a new one without sacrificing the entire relationship. Now, I just want to PSA announcement. Sometimes relationships really do need to end, and they are at a level of toxicity that is bordering on things like abuse and addiction and patterns that are incredibly destructive. And so what we're not saying is never leave your relationship. There is the right time and a right place. What we're saying is explore, rather than moving quickly to the relationship needs to end, is, well, how do we make that container die? How do we dismantle that and create a new one? And so that's the third secret, is if you're wanting more freedom, explore dismantling the context and creating a conscious new context, allowing the old relationship to die and beginning a new one. So I just wanted to end on that.
Oh, that's
note.
perfect. That's perfect.
Yes.
So
All right.
thanks for joining us for the Love Jam on how to break free without breaking up. And we will see you next time.
Yeah. See you next time.